Solomon Drayton pulled his Dodge Charger into the parking lot of Elmridge High School, the weathered red brick building standing unassumingly under the Texas sun. It was a typical small-town high school, with flags fluttering over the entrance and clusters of students lingering near the gym doors. The lot was already packed, parents in pressed shirts, siblings waving homemade signs, and an elderly woman leaning on her walker, all gathered for the class of 2024 graduation. Solomon parked near a chain-link fence, stepped out, and smoothed the deep blue fabric of his Marine Corps dress uniform. His boots, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the asphalt beneath him. It wasn't about vanity. Solomon didn't know how to do things halfway. He stood tall, his posture rigid yet calm, his dark skin contrasting sharply against the crisp uniform. His face carried a quiet stillness, the kind earned through years of seeing life from angles most never would. He had driven 8 hours from Temple, Texas, to be here for his son Tyron's graduation. He could have flown, but the Charger was his late wife's favorite, and even 2 years after her passing, driving it felt like carrying a piece of her with him. Before heading to the entrance, Solomon opened the glove compartment and retrieved a worn photograph, its corner slightly torn. It showed his wife Lena cradling Tyrone as a newborn. He slipped it into his jacket's inner pocket, close to his heart. "I promised you," he whispered, "I wouldn't miss it." The walk to the gym was deliberate, each step heavy with purpose. Pride and ache mingled in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Inside, the gym buzzed with live metal. Chairs lined the floor, bleachers overflowed with families, and the air carried the faint scent of popcorn and floor wax. Solomon presented his printed ticket to a volunteer, a short man with a clipboard and headset, who squinted at it and pointed to the third row on the left. "Family seating, up front," the man said. "Appreciate it," Solomon replied, his voice steady as he made his way through the crowd. Some glanced at him, their eyes lingering on his uniform before darting away. One woman offered a small smile, then whispered to her companion. Solomon didn't react. He'd been black, tall, and in uniform long enough to know what certain looks meant and which ones didn't. He settled into his assigned seat, the plastic chair wobbling slightly under his weight. He adjusted it without complaint and scanned. The gym. The stage was adorned with banners proclaiming Class of 2024 in bold silver letters. School board members milled about near the podium, shuffling notes. In the distance, rows of students in black gowns stood ready, and Solomon's eyes found Tyrant Orlanki, with his mother's expressive eyes. 18 years had passed in a blink. Solomon remembered holding Tyrant the night he was born, still in his uniform, dirt from Okinawa under his nails after a rushed flight home. Now here they were. The gym was alive with noise, chairs scraping, programs rustling, a man cursing under his breath after spilling his coffee. Solomon sat still, his focus narrowed to the stage and the weight of the photograph against his chest. The ceremony began with pomp and circumstance, and the crowd rose to their feet. Solomon stood, shoulders squared, arms at his sides, his presence a silent salute. The national anthem followed, and while others placed hands over their hearts, Solomon remained still, his entire being an embodiment of respect. He thought of Lena, how she'd have cried through the whole event, fussing over Tyrant's tie until it was perfect. As the anthem's final notes faded, 2 security guards approached down the side aisle, their steps purposeful, their badges read Harlan Security Services, and their black polo shirts and cargo pants marked them as private security, not police. The shorter guard, broad-shouldered with a shaved head, wore a tight expression. The taller one, lanky and chewing gum, seemed bored, like he'd rather be anywhere else. Solomon noticed them immediately, but didn't move. His training had taught him that stillness could command more than motion. The shorter guard leaned down. "Excuse me, sir," he said, voice low. "We're going to need you to come with us." Solomon turned his head slowly. "Is there a problem?" The taller guard stepped forward. "Yeah, there's sections for families of graduating seniors." Solomon reached into his pocket, producing his ticket. "This is my seat, 3rd row left. Side. Family seating." Confirmed. The shorter guard, Garvin, didn't glance at the ticket. "We got told it's full." "It was full when I sat down," Solomon replied evenly. "You want to tell me who gave that order?" The taller guard, Molly, shifted uncomfortably. "Look, it's not a big deal. There's extra seats in the back. Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be." Solomon's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in quiet calculation. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here." Heads began to turn. A woman 2 rows over nudged her husband, nodding toward the scene. Someone in the bleachers tilted their phone. possibly recording. Garvin straightened, glancing around, his hand adjusting the radio on his hip. Sir, I'm going to ask one more time. You can ask all day, Solomon said, his voice lower, firmer. I'm not moving. Molly sucked his teeth. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying. The words hit like a subtle jab, carrying a weight beyond logistics. Solomon had heard that tone before in boardrooms, waiting rooms, on bases. He didn't respond, letting the air shift around them, the kind of shift that happens when a line is crossed. An older woman beside him leaned over and whispered, "Don't you let them move you." Solomon nodded once, acknowledging her support. Molly lowered his voice. "Look, you got a problem. Take it up with the school office. We got our orders." "You have a name, son?" Solomon asked. Molly blinked. "It's Officer Molly." "Not officer," Solomon corrected. "Your private security." Garvin stepped in. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up," he didn't finish. The gym door clicked open, and 6 men entered, one by one. No uniforms, no badges, just firm postures and eyes that had seen worse than a high school gym standoff. They didn't walk together, taking different spots around the room, but their movements were synchronized in a way only those who'd served together could understand. Solomon didn't look back. He didn't need to. He knew who they were. The ceremony continued, names called, polite applause filling the air. But the focus had shifted. Eyes darted toward Solomon and the guards, who hovered like they were trying to assert dominance. Garvin muttered into his radio, never breaking eye contact with Solomon, who remained seated, his gaze fixed on the stage as if the conversation was over. The tension thickened. A man stood up a few rows back, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Another rose on the opposite side of the gym, then a third. They didn't speak, but their presence was unmistakable. Solomon knew them: Creed Mast, Javier Meeks, Zachary Wells, and the others. Men he'd led through hell, men who'd never forgotten. Garvin leaned down again, his voice carrying a new edge. "Listen, man, you're making this into a situation." Solomon turned slowly, "And you're not listening." Before Garvin could respond, a voice cut through from 10 feet away. "Is there a reason this man's being bothered?" It was Creed, tall with a salt and pepper beard, his tone calm but commanding. Garvin looked up, startled. "Who are you?" Creed stepped forward. "I asked you a question." Molly raised a hand. "Sir, we've got this under control." "No," Creed said sharply, "you don't." Another man stood, then another, until all 6 SEALs were on their feet, spread across the gym. The room wasn't silent, but it was close. A boy pointed. A teacher tried to redirect attention to the stage, but no one cared about diplomas anymore. Creed took another step. "You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this worse." Garvin glanced at Molly, who looked less sure by the second. "I don't care what your orders were," Creed continued. "You don't put your hands on that man, you don't tell him to move, you don't ask again." The silence that followed was heavy with respect. Solomon gave Creed a small nod, not a thank you, but a recognition. Creed's eyes softened briefly before he sat down, arms folded. The guards hesitated. Molly's jaw worked harder on his gum, but Garvin's hand twitched near his radio. Solomon's mind drifted to Kandahar 15 years ago. The sun had burned like a forge, the air thick with dust. An IED had flipped their convoy's lead Humvee, and gunfire followed, precise and relentless. Solomon, a gunnery sergeant, had moved without thinking, ducking behind a shattered doorframe. 6 men were pinned behind a burning vehicle, one of them Creed, blood streaming from a thigh wound. Solomon had sprinted through open ground, dragging Creed and another soldier, Enrique Stowe, to safety. He'd gone back for Divas, pinned under an engine block, lifting the metal just enough to free him. All 6 survived because Solomon didn't hesitate. That day forged a bond that time couldn't break. Back in the gym, the standoff continued. Garvin's voice grew louder. "This is your last warning." Solomon met his eyes. "To do what exactly?" "To stop making a scene," Garvin snapped, leaning so close his belt brushed Solomon's knee. "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, man, not your base." A hush fell. Molly stepped back, sensing the weight of Garvin's words. Solomon took a slow breath, not to calm himself, but to stay grounded. "You need to walk away." Garvin's hand dropped to his belt, not on a weapon, but close enough to feel threatening. Creed stood again, stepping into the aisle. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." Garvin turned. "And who the hell are you?" "The man telling you this ends now," Creed replied. The principal appeared, whispering urgently to the guards. Whatever she said was enough. Garvin's face burned, but he stepped back, Molly following. They retreated to the back exit without meeting anyone's eyes. Solomon exhaled, and Creed sat down. The 6 SEALs remained standing, their silence louder than any shout from the student lineup. Tyron watched it all. He'd seen the guards approach. His father sensed the tension from their body language. He knew that look on his dad's face, calm, unshakable, the same one he'd seen at 12 when a schoolyard bully had crossed a line. Tyron's heart pounded, torn between pride and fury. He'd grown up hearing fragments of his father's service Christmas cards from old comrades, a scar from somewhere in the dust, a box marked Kandahar in the garage. Now those stories were alive. Standing in the gym, having his father's back without a word, the line moved forward. Tyron was 3 students from the stage. He wiped his palms on his gown, trying to steady his breath. The girl in front of him grinned nervously. "You ready?" "More than you know," Tyron replied. Solomon leaned forward, his eyes locked on his son. The announcer paused, then spoke with weight. "Tyron Drayton." The room erupted, clapping, whistling, cheering, but it wasn't chaotic. The 6 SEALs applauded in unison, each clap deliberate, a salute without gesture. Tyron walked across the stage, chin high, step steady. His heart wasn't racing from nerves, but from pride in himself, in his father, in the name they shared. He took his diploma, shook the principal's hand, and turned to the audience, finding his father's eyes. Solomon gave a small, meaningful smile. Tyron nodded and stepped off the stage. The applause lingered, parents standing, some wiping tears moved by something they couldn't fully name. Solomon sat back, a quiet release, easing the weight in his chest. The ceremony continued, but the echo of that moment reshaped the room. The final name was called, and the graduates threw their caps, screaming with joy. Solomon waited as the crowd thinned, watching Tyron disappear into the hallway with his classmates. A teacher gave Tyron a high five, another a hug. Tyron glanced back once, and Solomon's expression answered the unspoken question. "I saw you." Creed approached as the gym emptied. "You okay?" "I've been through worse," Solomon said. Creed smiled faintly. "Yeah, but it still shouldn't have happened." Javier Meeks joined them. "We tried to stay low-key, but once that guy put his hand near his belt," Solomon raised a hand. "You did what needed to be done." Outside, the sun beat down on the concrete lot. Tyron stood near the flagpole, gown half unzipped, diploma in hand. When he saw his father, he broke off his conversation and met him halfway. "You okay?" Tyron asked. Solomon countered. "They tried to move you," Tyron said, jaw tight. "I was 2 seconds from walking off that stage." "And that's why you didn't," Solomon said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You knew I could handle it. And you handled your moment like a man." Tyron looked down, then up. "Who were those guys?" "Men I bled with," Solomon said. "Men who know what loyalty means." Tyron nodded. "That was powerful. It was necessary," Solomon replied. "Sometimes silence is louder than shouting." They walked to the Charger, the same car. Lena had loved. Tyron paused, running his fingers over a scratch on the door. "She would have been screaming the loudest today, and retaking every photo until your smile was perfect," Solomon added, grinning. They climbed in, the car warm and quiet. Tyron turned to his father. "Why didn't you say anything to those guards?" "You just sat there." "Because I don't have to stand up to be who I am," Solomon said, "and I don't need to raise my voice to be heard. Life will give you 100 chances to react with anger. Sometimes it's justified, but silence cuts deeper, dignity sticks longer." He pulled out the photograph of Lena and baby "I carried this through Kandahar, through losing your mum, through today. It reminds me what's worth protecting." Tyron's voice softened. "You always knew who had your back." "I didn't need to know," Solomon said. "I had faith. Real men show up and stand." "I want to be like that," Tyron said. "Like you." "You already are," Solomon replied. "You walked that stage with pride. You stayed grounded." Creed and the others drove off, Creed offering one last nod. Solomon returned as Tyron leaned back. "So, what now?" Solomon started the engine. "You choose dinner." "Waffle House," Tyron grinned. "Of course," Solomon chuckled as they pulled out. The school faded behind them, but the day's wait lingered. A lesson in manhood, not about noise, but about carrying yourself when the world stops watching.